This is gonna be kind of what I've been through the last couple days and studying wise. I got several pages of this. Uh, my voice in my head, as far as like what I'm thinking before I actually hit the record button, it doesn't quite mesh up because I'm used to just thinking in my head. But I've been researching schemata, and I started writing it off. The first thing I wrote was the musical schemata because that it's not a concept that I found anywhere else, but it's definitely something that I use. I use music to frame my thoughts in a very detailed sort of way. Uh, I did catch up on my sleep, and then I woke up in time to watch this Elliot Holmes thing, and they was going to talk about like he's kind of I don't know. It was just he went into it's just really a lot of religious. This is the way all of society needs to be, and need to like wage war on anything outside of it, and so I see that as tradition as a reaction to the mass degeneracy. It's it's like the whole equal and opposite reactions. So they're in the process of justifying. There's like, oh, we don't want any violence or anything like that. But given the history of like genocide and all that shit, like it's prepping itself. And then there's the curse of gray face, which is a Discordian concept. That's where I came up with the idea of cultural schemata because well, schemata is a framework for which you use to. I'm debating this starting a video over just it's a framework of boundaries that you use to quickly or frame something. Uh, so for me, that was some of the cultural schemata would be like ideas about a culture or ideas about a culture about me, which a lot of those are going to be assessment of threat, being what I am as far as like this feminine males just have not been very welcome in society, uh, or by like stereotypical males who are hard lined that that's the only way to be, and by religion and all that. And encompassing schemata would be something that I'm better at when I'm not talking alongside of it, but it's taking in several different all at once. I guess these are things that you can look up and you can learn a lot more. Is like I'm going through like a lot of different things. I'm trying to understand it, and I was thinking rumination, sort of the space in between the schematas, or at least when you allow yourself some time and think to think outside those bounds and take in new information or adapt or adjust them. And then I got into the there's behavioral scripts, and I came up with the idea of congestion, which is what I have a lot of problem with because like I'm running a behavioral script right now and trying to do this video, but I've got and I've had this sort of I need to do this like for a while, but I needed to get the preparatory work done. And also, there's other behavioral scripts that I'm trying to like decide the path for, and it's like all fucking survival based. So it's like damned if you do, damned if you don't. And then should get to like the Art of War later, but I do remember Art of War Chapter 8 goes into like don't linger in spots, don't camp in bad spots, what to do in hemmed in grounds. So I was kind of applying that to whatnot. I got axiom schemata, which has some terms associated with it I don't quite understand. I know I get what axioms are though, and how axioms are like the foundation of religion and moral, ethical, this or that, but it's a mathematical term. And then there's a schematic variable, which is a meta variable, and then there's schemata, and in the sense is a logical form and logic arguments. And then there's image schemata, which I just recently sort of discovered by looking at the disambiguation of that, and that's a really big one. I have to go back and look at. I think I was restarting this thing, but So I got here. I went on a bit of a tangent with the lens, because it's like you can see something through a lens. So I looked up lenses, and I found that a lot of the scientific data on lenses or scientific concepts is useful to apply to the mind. And that's also because I've always had, since like I guess I was younger, this idea like they would kind of pop in my mind. Like when I would get an intuition about something, it's like a magnifying glass or like a it's just like I put like a, go the ray of light, right? Is lenses got a ray of light, so it goes through the lens, and then that alters how the light's picked up. And there's like convergent and divergent lenses and mirrors and all that stuff has analogies in the mind. Uh, I'm trying to rush through it, so it's like I'm being, I guess I'm being vague, and there's ambiguity. But that's one of the things I looked up is ambiguity, and you can see that ambiguity is inherent within nature. Uh, I found the parity problem, which it talks about like prime numbers, but if you look at those prime numbers as like primes in ethics, then that's the so there's lower and upper bounds without interjecting additional ingredients, which would displace you off from the truth. I'm using displacement because, uh, yeah, displaced truth is the only sword bleeding minds, just like from a song. I look up displacement, and I got something down here at the bottom. Whereas I came across the transformation, and I hit it for genetics, and it was somewhat like bacteria and stuff, and it was cool. They take extragenous DNA, which is like stuff from the outside, and there's a certain like competence that allows them to integrate outside DNA into themselves, and that has a regulation which is survival dependent. There's transcription, which is just keep by evolutionary function. It adds to diversity. Uh, there was something for the self bias of it, and then there was DNA repair, horizontal gene transfer, which I put mimicry after that because it's kind of related to mimicry. This was all like I happened to I have my phone on random, so like chapter 7 of the Art of War came up, which is for maneuvers, and but then it goes into deviation, which is like a sort of catch-all word for people such as myself, right? But it's not necessarily. It doesn't necessarily mean a bad thing. I was like, okay, well, what's it mean? And trying to study that as a that chapter, and I got into the mathematics of it, which is the variables difference between the observed and what the average is. So the average for like a man, let's say, is something, right? But then the observed would be like what I am, which is like pretty far deviant off it. But then there's a sign property, or there's the sign, which is the property of being positive, negative, or zero. And then zero may be I put zero, a power set of either, because there's like this whole thing with sets I didn't understand, but I got the gist of the power set. And so basically that's saying that zero can also be considered all the, like if you look at positive, negative as yin yang or genders, zero can be considered all sorts of combinations of it. I looked into the parity of a permutation, and it talks about like bijective functions and total ordering, and there's inversions I got to look into. There's alternating character, it talks about odds and evens. There's like all like I still gotta look into that's how I get like 1,000 fucking tabs open, like literally over the course of however many years. Uh, well defined was a fucking rabbit hole because that led to it led to like 2D Elucid, uh, 2D. I had to like write it real small on the side. I gotta go back and look that up again. But it's got basically comparing two perimeters, and it's a reflection of I guess the 3D world, but in a 2D sense. Put it towards ideas. There's something with how if you test the unique expression of something by changing its inputs, and if the output is still the same, you kind of identify something consistent within it. So it's like I haven't changed. There's certain things I haven't changed up about my behavior, despite whatever inputs have been put into it. So that kind of is further proof that it's valid. Uh, then there's confounding variables, which is probably the most important thing. And they could also be considered lurking variables. So if you have x and y, and you're making all these causations between them, like the chicken or the egg, which came first. You see, how the chicken came first, so it's more important, and the egg should be like, I don't know, however men justify like the whole thing, like their wives should serve them and all that shit. Like it's basically like that whole patriarchy, whatever. Uh, it tries to reduce or suppress the common variable between. So I would be like a z factor that they try to get rid of. There's Bergson's paradox, which there's a certain I get bias. This is some of the stuff I didn't write. Like very, it's hard to write, like, because it's not the neatest. Sometimes it varies, and then I'm trying to learn a lot of stuff at the same time that I'm writing. There's definitionism, which is the ostensive definition where you point at something to define it, like the color red. You can't really describe it. It's like, oh, it's this and this wavelength. But you gotta say, oh, look, like you can point. So that's kind of what I pointed myself as an example of something that's not like the stereotypical trans bullshit. Then there's sampling bias where you don't include everyone. You just include like just the shitty people from a group. Like the morphisms, and there's natural transformation and categorical theory. There's duality. This is like just really like fucking. There's like huge fucking rabbit hole, and it's like there's been so much work done to say like the mathematics, but there isn't. How does this apply to just like the mind and sociology and all that sort of stuff? It's just all math, but it applies. Here's where I try to just go, because started with the chapter 7, but then from deviation, like I went immediately to like I just spent so long in the mathematics of it. So on the back I tried to get the gist of actually what it is from chapter 7, and like blending and harmonizing one's host. So that's all the various fractional parts of the psyche, at least how I'm applying it here. And you look at that as like like the army, like how Sun Tzu talks about the army. He talks about like how advancing with a disorganized multitude is disadvantageous, but marching with an army is advantageous. So it's sort of unifying the self. It is all survival too, in the sense that my brain is just sort of trying to pick out the things that are most going to aid in my survival. There's tactical maneuvering, which he says there's nothing more difficult, which is kind of what I'm trying to do now between all the different shit I'm supposed to do or behind on or I need to do. Turning misfortune into gain. That's the biggest thing. Yeah. And I tend to turn gain into misfortune. Like I don't know, I'm fucking weird. There's some stuff I can't read here. And that's use drums, gongs, flags, and banners. So I got that between self signal and other signals. So obviously I came up like drums and gongs would apply to say music for me, or well I guess that's how the self principle worked. But then I guess the other principle is like communicating here, and then signs, flags. It's just like how a person, the freedom to address how you want. It's it's an inward expression, but it's also an outward expression. And it can help. Well, a lot of times it helps center a person in themselves, rather than letting them be just swept up by whatever the culture tells them what to do. I put there's in the end it says things like don't swallow bait and uh, I don't know. There's like several things, but don't attack an enemy. Like don't go uphill to attack an enemy coming downhill. Just kind of what I feel like I'm doing. But it also in the end it says don't press desperate foe, which I feel like in a desperate situation. And I remember the avant-garde. So this is art culture, and I learned what the word elan means. Elan. Sort of enthusiasm. It's oh yeah. Then there's a. I came across a interpretation on the Eden where the Elohim is kind of seen as taken as being man, and Eden is taken as being the earth, and between the two of them and the reverence and love, let's say, between man and earth, that all these children are begotten, but then man learns about the transcendental good, and then trying to become perfect like it unleashes all the evil upon the world. It was from a second century Gnostic, and that's kind of like what I've been trying to say, but it's in a much simpler format. So I think that's obviously what happened. And then so I started, as I was trying to build up to this, I looked up emotional torque as something from way, way, way back years ago that I found from TV tropes. Like I use tropes, and I brought it back so in my mind as far as that's kind of what I was needed. And then what I got from there is art isn't about making you feel good; it's about making you feel. So commercial consumerism art's all about making you feel good, but it's like love bombing. It's mind control methods. Whereas, well, I came across a couple of new tropes too, like jerk-ass Whoopi, and maddened by misanthropy, which is the two I could fall under. And they're trying to get the spirit of, well, there's different spirits really that I can get in the spirit of, or I need to like bring them together. Uh, so yeah, the cold insincerity of steel machines has consumed our euphoria, transmuting us into muted dreams. So that whole fucking paradigm, and that's where I got displacement from. Is that song? And truth is the only sword bleeding minds. So yeah, things like, oh, this is the truth. It says it in this book. It's the truth for all. And if you don't obey, we're gonna kill you, or we're gonna like torment you and all that shit. And I got episodic memory. I came up with episodic memory mirroring, which is because a lot of songs they'll have a moment in which they were really pivotal, and so I could bring the episodic memory back from where it was, and sort of channel that energy and use it to bring into like the host of blending and all that sort of shit. And I got Dungeon Crawl has a list of gods and whatnot. They're obviously all made up, but they're useful, and I actually each one of them would kind of consist of a schemata, and there's one I can't pronounce, but it's about memory and ancestors and whatnot. And one of the abilities they give you is transference. So I looked it up in psychology. That's a whole other thing where I can take it's like it seems like I can take that from the past and bring it forward to the present. Uh, and I got North Side, which is from the song South Side, but North Side is this song has 4 parts, and I I put a fuckload of meaning into every part, just about every word, and it's like a phase sort of circle thing where like it talks about the East Side first, and that's my internal friends and whatnot. Some may come, some may stay. So it's whatever I can bring out of all of my internal processes to bear, and it's also about hope and God and faith, whatnot. Uh, and then the West Side is where you get your weapons, your preps and whatnot ready. The North Side is it says the North Side it says it doesn't say like we ride. It's like I watch them ride kind of thing. So that's about ancestors and those that have died and the people you have looking over you and whatnot. And then finally, it's like through heaven and hell is the south side, which is actually going through the process of doing a thing. And this is kind of what this is. That's this process of it, which I can just attribute each one to like different elements. Like I'm pretty sure that'd be like fire and the first one of gathering your faith and your mental resources and all that, your hope and all that, and probably like water, maybe. I've got it when I'm. It comes and goes. Which I also learned of. There's a new dungeon crawl god. It's like Ignis, and it's one that starts out at full power instead of you having to build your power up with it, but it degrades over time. And that's just, it seemed like I never heard of that one before. It's new, like I said, it's added, it's fiction, whatever, but it's actually a decent descriptor of how like motivational states might work, where they start off as an inferno, and then next thing you know, then they eventually break down and they're to the level of a burning coal or a smoldering coal. So that, yeah, there's a whole bunch of tropes I added onto that sort of, where there's like an hour of power and it's fleeting. Like power is fleeting, and if you don't use it, then it gets it's probably sent into back to the subconscious and shit, and turns into all sorts of issues. This probably wasn't the most clear. I'm running out of time actually at like 40 seconds, so that's just really vague, sort of. It's better in my head as I'm figuring it out, and I'm gonna have to keep reading shit over and over again because a lot of this shit I don't actually understand. But I'm definitely taking an offshoot path from everyone else, and that's just seems like intuitively the only way my survival is gonna work.